My name is Tuan Anh Bui. Finding the drivers of disgust and suitable fishing areas, a spatial-temporal modeling approach. So, disgusts are defined as the portion of both target or non-target catches discarded overboard, either dead or alive. Disgusts have been an important issue in fishery management from both economic and environmental points of view, as they cause the waste of marketable resources and ecosystem disturbance. Disgust mitigation using selective gears has been investigated intensively in European fisheries. However, they were not fully successful, and spatial management has emerged as a potential complementary possibility, especially in the context of the new landing obligation that applies the landing of all quota-regulated catches. This thesis aims to apply spatial-temporal modeling for the first time in the Belgian beam trawl fishery to understand, first, the taxon-specific drivers of discard ratio variability, and second, the spatial-temporal distribution of discard ratios. This study focused on the main Belgian, the flatfish-directed beam trawl, as you can see the illustration on the screen, equipped with a content mesh size between 70 and 99 millimeters. Data were collected by onboard observations from 2006 to 2018, covering the northwest European shelf from the Biscay Bay to the North Sea. A total 9,257 holes were collected. Discard ratio was calculated for each taxon at each sample hole by dividing the discarded biomass by the catch biomass. With 8 species and 1 family were selected, including sole, plaice, dab, lemon sole, cod, hake, haddock, whiting, and skate. 12 predictors were selected to reflect changes in fishing characteristics, such as the catch quantity, catch per unit effort, the ICS division and quarter of the year where and when fishing occurred. Legislative and economic factors, including the quota restrictions, size composition of the catch, and fish price, and finally, environmental characteristics. The general formulation of a model is presented in this equation, in which discard ratio is assumed to follow a beta distribution and is linked to predictors of interest using a logic link. Specifically, I is intercept, V, T, W, and Y are the vessel trip, spatial, and year random effects. X is the value of a predictor subjected to a linear or nonlinear effect. The parameters of the models were estimated using inline approach in R. Inline is a new method for spatial analysis. The next part is results and discussion. The overall discard ratios of the study taxa was 0.4. The most discarded taxa in terms of biomass was plaice, leather spotted dogfish, and skates. The discard ratio vary among and within taxa, as we can see on the density plots. Sole showed a very low discard ratio and variation, with more than 90% of values under 0.25. We see that the plots tend to spread in lemon sole and cod, indicating that higher variation compared to sole, but they still had a relatively low discard ratio. High variation occurred in plaice and skates, indicated by the relatively uniform distribution, as we can see here on the plots. And finally, whiting, haddock, hake, and dab were the species with high discard ratios. Fish price was identified to be significantly correlated to discard ratios. Specifically, species with high values such as common sole and lemon sole. I'm not sure if you can see it clearly. They are here on the top. They had lower discard ratio than other less valued species. However, within the taxon, there was no or little effect on discard ratio. The size composition of the catch was the most important factor in explaining the variation of discard ratios. This can be seen from the visualization of the effects of predictors. Specifically, the x-axis is the values of predictors, and the y-axis is the fitted discard ratios. And we can see that the magnitude of effect of mean length is like stronger than others predictors such as CPUE, limit utilization, price, or bathymetry in the case of common sole. Size is indeed a major cause of discarding due to the constraint by legal minimum conservation reference size, the minimum marketable size, at the size at which below which fish was supposed to be discarded before the introduction of the landing obligation. This finding is in agreement with previous studies showing that the majority of discards was due to undersized fish. The length frequency distribution shows the abundance of fish in each length class, and discarded fraction is presented by the solid line, the landed fraction is presented by the dashed line, and the minimum conservation reference size is presented by the vertical dotted line. We see that the majority of discarded fraction of plaice is below minimum conservation reference size. This indicates that plaice was almost always discarded at size below IMBRSea, and this was similar for dab, lemon sole, and sole. Discards at size above IMBRSea occurred in hake, cod, whiting, and haddock. For example, in the case of cod, 40% of the discarded fraction was above the minimum conservation reference size. Potential explanations for this could be to save storage space or the restrictions on overall landing composition that were not accounted for in the models. Previous studies showed the link between quota restrictions and discards above IMBRSea, but this study could not confirm that. Regarding quota restrictions, which is reflected by the limit utilization, this was only relevant for sole and plaice. Generally, more discards are expected when limit utilization is higher or less quota remained. However, there was a counterintuitive effect for plaice that less discards occurred when limit utilization is higher. This could be due to the tendency of fishers to discard less when plaice is targeted. Overall, the information on the usage of quota has no or little effect on the discard decision of fishers, and this is in contrast to earlier studies and might indicate that the use of limit utilization index might not be able to capture changes in quota, and a possible alternative could be to use hole limit, which quantifies allowable landings at each hole. The taxon-specific catch affect discard ratio negatively except for lemon sole. This is in contrast to previous study showing that the total discard ratio is proportional to the total catch. However, this difference could be due to the different scope of assessment between taxon-specific discard ratios in this study and the total discard ratio of all species in the previous study. Regarding the temporal variation, no year variation was identified, indicating that the spatial structures of discard ratios persisted over years. Seasonal discarding occurred in most of the species. Specifically, plaice was discarded more by the end of the year. Lack of quota or low fish price were identified to be relevant in previous study, but that was contrast to the findings of this study. A possible reason could be the higher abundance of juvenile plaice resulting from spawning in the previous winter. In the case of sole, higher discard ratio was found in the first quarter, which coincides with the spawning season of sole when the fish condition and market price is lower. Spatial variation showed high patchiness in plaice, dab, lemon sole, and cod. For example, in the case of plaice, the predictive map shows multiple discard hotspots in yellow, as you can see on here, and multiple discard cold spots in deep blue. Cost variation was found in sole, whiting, haddock, hake, and skate. For example, in the case of sole, a few discard hotspots were identified in northern the Netherlands, Western English Channel, and the Celtic Sea South. And discard cold spots were identified in southern Ireland, and a vast area from central North Sea to eastern English Channel. These differences in spatial variation discussed could be due to the behavior of fish, as some species such as plaice, cod, and lemon sole were identified to be widely distributed, while others such as sole, haddock, hake, thornback ray, and spotted ray tend to be more confined distributed. Since size composition was the most important factor explaining discard ratios, the spatial variation could be linked to the distribution of juvenile and mature fish. In the case of plaice, higher discard ratio was predicted in offshore, more in offshore than in nearshore waters, and this could be linked to the migration of juvenile fish from nursery areas to deeper water. In the case of sole, high discard ratio was predicted in the northern Netherlands. This is an important nursery area for sole, and the sole juvenile tend to have a small home range and settle in nursery area before maturity, so the abundance of juvenile sole could be higher in this area. The low discard ratio predicted in the southern North Sea and eastern English Channel could be due to the concentration of mature population in this area. So overall, 3 suitable fishing areas were identified with low discard ratio of almost all taxa. As we can see, the deep blue area here, for example, plaice, cod, whiting, common sole, and haddock. And another criteria to identify fishing suitable areas is high landings of sole, the main target species of the metier. LPUE is the landing per unit effort. 4 discard hotspots were identified with high discard ratios of almost all taxa, indicated by the yellow spots. For example, dab, plaice, cod, whiting, sole. Yeah, so 3 areas were identified in Western English Channel and Celtic Sea South, and another area in northern Netherlands. So to conclude, this study identified that size composition of the catch and spatial variability were the most important factors in explaining the variation of discard ratios. Fish price correlated to discard ratio among taxa, but had little effect within the taxon. Taxon-specific catch, quota restrictions, and environmental factors had little importance. Spatial structures of discards persisted over years with seasonal variation, and dab, plaice, lemon sole, and cod were the species with high patchiness of spatial variation, while whiting, sole, haddock, hake, and skate had coarser variation. This study represents the first step towards facilitating spatial management in the Belgian beam trawl fishery, and further research is needed, such as regionalized analysis, to improve the resolution and also to avoid uncertain prediction for species that had confined distribution. In addition, fishing effort data such as logbook or VMS could be integrated in the modeling in order to facilitate the identification of fishing suitable areas. Another thing could be done is to overlay the taxon-specific maps into a single predictive surface in order to provide a more comprehensive mapping. And finally, near real-time analysis could be the further step towards dynamic management strategies in the future. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And I would like to especially thank my promoter, Marlene de Troch, and my supervisor, Jochen de Pestelet, for their support and their guidance, without which I could not be able to finish my work. And also special thanks to IMBRSea program and partners universities for making this opportunity available possible.